welcome to the Many Mosaic podcast. I'm your host, Luna. Today I'm being joined by two brilliant women, Philippa and Jacqui from Not In Our Name Women, which is a collective of everyday women speaking up for trans rights and trans inclusion. Their open letter has over 100,000 signatures showing just how many cisgender women stand in support of the trans plus community. They want to use this support to build a kinder and fairer world for all of us. And I'm so grateful and very honoured to be joined by them today. And I hope you're going to enjoy the podcast where they're going to talk a little bit more about this initiative and what the letter's about, and hopefully get your support too. So welcome, Philippa and Jacqui. Do you want to begin by just telling us a little bit about yourselves?
Hi, I'm Jacqui and I live in the north of England in Yorkshire, and I have a trans daughter, an adult daughter now. And that's why when I found out about this initiative, I was already doing other things in relation to supporting families. It obviously spoke to me as something that I wanted to get involved with, because through my journey, I'd seen and learned a lot from being dropped into it, the situation, and it obviously naturally was very close to my heart, but it just felt not right what was going on, and that it was of value to raise the profile of what was happening so that other people could understand it as well.
Yeah, thanks, Jacqui. So important, isn't it? If something calls to you and if it's close to home, I think you have an overview that some people might not get. So it's great to have you here to talk about it. Thank you. Philippa, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm based in Lincolnshire. I'm actually a clinical psychologist by background. I'm also a novelist, and my wife is transgender. She actually transitioned after we got married, which was a whole thing in our relationship. It was extremely challenging in its own ways, as people might imagine, but happily we've come out on the other side of that, and we continue as, you know, a very happily married couple. But not long after her transition, things really started to change in the UK with trans rights. And a little bit like Jacqui said, there was such a contrast for me between how I understood my wife and our relationship, and ultimately the joy that came with sort of joining these communities of queer people and seeing the love and support and authenticity and creativity of these communities, and the narratives that we were seeing in the media and from politicians. And there were so many people speaking against trans people that I just had a sense that there was really something missing, that there was a voice missing, that there were, you know, so many people had been so supportive of me and Ellie that we just knew there were people who didn't feel that way. And it wasn't a case of trans people fighting a fight and then people fighting against trans rights, but there were a whole group of cisgender people, in particular women, who just had no problem with the trans community and had trans friends or loved ones, or just a bit like you're saying, Jacqui, just felt that something was off in these narratives. So when someone reached out to me from Neon and asked if I wanted, sorry, Not In Our Name Women, Neon for short, asked if I wanted to be involved, I practically chewed their arm off to say, yes, I would love to be. So that's how I got involved.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for sharing that, and also for sharing a bit about your journey there. It sounds like a very deep journey that you've taken. So I just want to mention that to honour it. So I'd also, just so for the viewers as well, I have actually had trans people in my life. I don't anymore. They were children, but I did get to witness just how difficult it is to be a trans person, particularly in school, where there's no support and it doesn't get mentioned or taught. That in particular was very difficult, and I got to see that with two people in my life. So that's the only experience I have. So you've written an open letter in support of trans people that cisgendered non-trans women can sign to show their support. Can you just tell us a little bit about what prompted that and how it all began?
It was an idea from an amazing woman called Claire Harvey, who came up with this idea that the way to change the minds of the people who were like making these changes that we were seeing from a government perspective was to show them, as we've already said, that the majority of women, so cis women, so people who are not trans, women who are not trans, and that's all that term cis means for anyone that's not familiar with it, weren't in support of the things that were happening when people were stating that this is what women want. And so she had this idea of like trying to create this movement of people and body of people in support by writing a letter and getting volume, because you need a certain number of people for politicians to pay attention, for them to see that that's the majority. I heard about it through a trans friend of mine who said a friend of mine is doing something, and she said you need to do something. So it was like everybody was finding out about it through different routes, to people who were already actively campaigning. So maybe it all was very organic at the beginning as people joined. So
that's how you know it was proper grassroots, because
nobody knows everybody started.
I think there was definitely certain narratives that were so dominant in the discourse that trans rights were somehow in conflict with women's rights, or even a threat to women and their rights, and that you had to protect women by pushing back against trans inclusion. It felt like we really needed to highlight and show that this was a narrative that really didn't speak for everybody, and that was the one that was getting heard a lot and pushed all the time. But did it really represent what normal, everyday, on the ground people actually felt? I think we also had the sense that it was a damaging narrative for obviously the trans community, but also that it was a damaging narrative for women as well, because it did that thing where it chooses a group to scapegoat as being the problem and the threat to women, and then means that everyone puts their focus and their energy and their politics all focus on that, and then we're not focusing on the actual issues that impact women. So rife misogyny and sexism and gender equality and patriarchal structures that keep the limits on what women can do and what women can be, and the real sources of violence and abuse of women, which is not trans people. It's men who abuse their power, and it's the systems around those men that perpetuate and allow that. Of course, that's not saying that all men are like that, but in our culture, there is a real issue with misogyny and sexism, and that's not trans people. So we felt that we were speaking up to show that trans inclusion was an ordinary, everyday view that people had, that they supported that, and also to say, look, you're looking in the wrong place here, and you're misdirecting and you're distracting from what women really need to be coming together to not be fractured and fighting with each other, but to all come together, push back on the things that really threaten us and really take away from our rights.
Yeah, here. And I think it's so easy for people to get distracted because we've got social media now. There's a lot out there in the world at the moment that's quite deceitful, I find, and it's all coming to light at the moment. And majority of it, unfortunately, is the set of men that are hurting women rather than it being trans people. And I think it has fractured us, and it is a concern. I think it's a bit like the squeaky wheel gets oiled, doesn't it? And the media knows that, so they put out a lot of this false narrative, and they also know that it divides people and prevents them from dealing with the true issues and the things that are really truly a threat to women. And it's so important because we need to deal with that threat. Otherwise, it will never get healed. It will never get resolved in the world. So I think it's so important what you're all doing. Such a great way of doing it as well.
And I think just to tag on to your point there, Luna, I think in terms of media coverage, cis women and trans person get along. It's not an attention-grabbing headline. So when you focus on headlines that generate anger and fear, as we know, we talk about this in so many areas, that's what drives clicks. So yeah, the much more accurate narrative of people don't have a problem with this and everyone's just going about their business quietly and it being perfectly pleasant to each other. That's not a story. But we wanted to show that it is a narrative, and that's what we're showing with our open letter.
Yeah.
And I think a couple of points to make, if that's okay, is obviously scapegoating is a classic tactic that's been used through the ages to distract people. And we won't have to go into political history lesson to talk about that. We're all well aware of how that's used. But also, people are scared of things that are different, that they don't understand. And if you fuel that, then it allows people to focus on that. And again, that is a strategy, isn't it? It's a very purposeful strategy that's used. But the thing that I found that's always interested me is that most people are not worried or concerned and haven't given it any thought, because if it's never crossed their path, they haven't thought about it. But then if you keep seeing something, you start thinking about it, and at the moment people maybe then go off down the wrong path. But also the fascinating thing to me is that when I talk to friends and acquaintances and bits and pieces, if it came up about my daughter, was how many people who I have known for years would then go, oh yeah, I used to work with a trans person and they transitioned at work. And these people that I have known for decades, some of them, and they've never mentioned it to me before because it just wasn't that big a thing for them, enough to them to have mentioned it in like a scandalous, gossipy way. And they obviously are bringing it up for me because of what I've shared. And it continued to surprise me how many people that I remembered who, in passing an acquaintance, had had trans kids, and they'd sort of mentioned it to me for whatever reason and thinking, oh gosh, that's a lot to deal with, but not feeling anything like about it, just thinking that's a big thing for her family to deal with. So people who are aware have never made a big thing about it. They've just accepted it and got on with it. And anybody else, the trans population is a very small population, and everybody else probably hasn't even given it that much thought before now because they've got other stuff to think about. And it's so true across the board. It just feels that that's been my experience of just talking to just regular people that cross my path in the course of my sort of day job. It's just not a thing.
Yeah. And also it makes me think about, because as I mentioned, I work in the mental health field, so I think there's a much less stigma on mental health now, and people talk about it way more openly, which is fantastic. But maybe sort of 10 years ago, it would be that thing where if you mentioned you'd had depression, someone else would say, oh, yes, I did, or my sister did. And I feel like it's a bit the same with trans people. There's actually loads of people have, despite them being a very small population, actually a lot of us do have someone that they know that is trans. It's just that people haven't really talked about it because they maybe felt, well, maybe I am the only one. But I think that it's sort of like 1 in 100 people are trans, roughly something like that. So chances are you know someone who knows someone. And like Jacqui says, it's just not been a thing. And people have just been happily getting on with their lives. And actually, they are part of our community. They're part of our families. They're part of our friendships. They're among our colleagues. And they're just part of us. They're part of our society, aren't they? And that's fine.
Yeah, and that's it. They're one of us, aren't they? I love the way, Jacqui, you said purposeful strategy. That really struck because I think that's exactly what it is. It's a purposeful strategy. I remember a while ago I saw David Tennant. It was on a programme. He was just being asked questions by a group of people on the programme, and one of them asked him about his support of the trans community. And what really stayed with me was he just said, just let people be. Just let people be. And it's such a simple sentence, but for me, it just really was so succinct and summed up exactly how I feel about it. Just let people be. And as you've both said, it's not that big a deal. Just let people be. I was just wondering though, why is it only women that can sign the letter? Can I just ask that? Why is it not everyone?
So the main reason for that was following on from the Supreme Court ruling, which was April last year, because that was put forward, the actual case was put forward by a group called For Women in Scotland. And they were talking about this is what women want. And then also because in this country, there's many reasons around the world, without going into lots of detail, why certain countries have got a thing about trans people. But specific and quite unique to the UK is this thing about this feminist this stance of people who claim to be feminists and see trans people and trans women as a threat, and that they're not part of the women female community. And that is quite specific to the UK. And so that was why, because that is our particular sort of flavour of transphobia, is this thing of we are women, we are standing up for women, this is a thing for women. And therefore, to have signatures on a letter with all the things we've already talked about, saying let's stop detracting from who it is that is actually the threat to women that we've already gone through, and let's show that there are many, many, many women in the UK who are not trans, who support the trans community, to show that people are not speaking, and that's why we called it Not in Our Name, and not speaking on our behalf, even though if you read certain newspapers and most of the media, you would think that it is what the majority held view. So that's the reason. And it's not to exclude the support or allyship of any other group of people. It's because we're trying to make it very specific so that when we can use that number, and we set the 100k because we needed a big number, we can use it and make it very specific to the situation and the scenario for this country.
Yeah. And actually, I can feel some real power in that. I think there's more power because it is so specific.
Yeah.
To speak to the issues that are there.
I think, yeah, absolutely. Like Jacqui said, the way that those who had been involved in the Supreme Court case described it was a victory for women.
Yeah.
And we felt it was anything but, as we were saying, that was on the assumption that there was a battle between the trans community and women, and that it was a zero-sum game, and that you can't have trans rights without women losing, or you can't have women's rights without trans people losing. And we were very much coming, and again, the judge said when reading the ruling out that it should not be seen as a victory for either side, but immediately it got turned into this narrative that this was a win, a victory for women. And we wanted to say, no, we feel completely differently. We feel that we are on the same side as the trans community, and that this pushback against trans rights, actually, it takes us all backwards. To be so limited in how you understand womanhood and how you define what someone's gender is, actually, it doesn't help any of us. And so, yes, I think we could have had a letter that was just from men or women who were allies of the trans community, but then I think we would have simply fallen into people saying, well, of course men would support, because
it's against women. Yeah.
But actually, by saying, no, look, cis women, you can't keep co-opting our voices against trans people. So yes, we've been pretty strict about the inclusion of who can sign the letter, but just like Jacqui says, anyone can be an ally of our vision and our movement and can share our beliefs, and we welcome all their support. So it's just for the letter.
Yeah. And I think I love the name, Not in Our Name, because that's it, isn't it? I know when I heard the Supreme Court ruling and saw the headlines that it was a victory for women, for me personally, that struck in my heart. And I was really saddened, but also I was very angry because I did feel like not in my name, because I don't believe that. I don't believe it was a victory at all, actually. I think it's really powerful to have this letter that women can sign to say that. I think it's so powerful what you've done. Really good work. So can you tell us a little bit, though, about why it's important to write a letter like this? What are your aims with it?
Following on from what we've just said, I think it was, in a way, exactly for people like you, Luna, people who were seeing those reports of the Supreme Court ruling. And just to clarify, in case people, because we're making assumptions that people were aware of this, but there was a ruling in the Supreme Court last April of a case which had gone through a number of lower courts as well, about how the terms sex, man and woman should be defined in the UK Equality Act. And up until now, it was understood that those definitions could include trans people, specifically trans people with a gender recognition certificate that changed their legal sex. And that was very important understanding, as you could imagine. But For Women Scotland had challenged that interpretation. And ultimately, the Supreme Court ruled, And it's important to say that there were no trans organisations involved in that court case, which I think there was various reasons for that, but I think it was a significant aspect of maybe how we ended up here. But the Supreme Court ruled that those terms should be defined only in terms of your biological sex, which in practice means whatever was originally put on your birth certificate. And regardless if that had been updated with a gender recognition certificate, or regardless if you had socially and medically transitioned and had been living as according to your gender for decades, you would not be recognised under the Equality Act under those terms. So yes, immediately was a very exclusionary position against trans people. And this open letter was very much for people like you, Luna, who sort of felt a bit sick to their stomach in hearing how that was portrayed and what the ramifications of that were potentially going to be. So that was part of it, just like we were saying, being able to show that many, many, many non-trans women just didn't feel the same, that they respected people's gender identity, that they were supportive of inclusion. But also, I think we felt it was a really simple, low-risk way that people could make their position heard. So I think the discussions around trans rights have been extremely toxic, extremely polarized, and very difficult for people to engage in if they didn't feel they knew too much or didn't feel that they could take the flack that would potentially come with it on social media and so on. But we wanted to give people a way that all they had to do was put their name, even just their initials, even just their first name, on a letter. They could be very anonymous effectively, but they could add their voice and they could speak up and they could show their support. That didn't need to involve writing to their MP or going on a protest march or even telling anybody else in their network that they had done it. But they could do something really easy and simple. And we gave them a way and hopefully gave them a safe space where they could feel, I can have a place in these discussions. I don't have to be a member of the trans community and an ally in the trans community. And I don't have to be a woman fighting against trans rights, but I can have a place here and I can be part of a community of people who've signed this letter and just say, yeah, me too, not in my name. So the letter was just a simple way to come on board.
Yeah, I think it's so important and it's so easy to do, and it means that we're stronger together, aren't we? I like that you use the word community because that's what it feels like, even though it's so simple and so quick to do. I signed the letter quite some time ago now, but I remember you just go online, don't you, and look for it and just add your name and that's it. It's so simple and easy to do. Yeah,
Notinourname.org.uk.
yeah. I'll put the links in the show notes for everybody, and we'll also tag your Facebook page and things like that so that people can find you when this podcast goes out, so people can very easily go and do that. So I was wondering, what reactions have you had to the letter? What kind of responses have you had?
I'm part of the team that manages our social media account, so that's where we get a lot of our feedback, as you can imagine. And I think that it's been super positive. I think pretty much just what we wanted to do was that women felt they could say, yes, this is how I feel. And yes, thank you for making this clear. And thank you for giving us a place where we can stand up and say this. And I think, going back to that word community, I really feel that we are building a sense of community. Like, I actually quite like just replying to people on our social media page, when people make a little comment and we'll reply, say thank you and that sort of thing. And I think there's just been a sense that there's maybe the word is relief almost as well, like thank you, finally we've got this narrative and this perspective is being put forward, because it's just been missing. And just knowing, and we talk quite a lot about this within Neon, that knowing that you're not the only cis woman who feels this, like thinking, if you see those headlines and you have that reaction to say, oh, that doesn't feel right to me, you might think, well, maybe I'm the only one who thinks that. So I feel too nervous to speak up and say anything. But actually to know, oh, okay, there are tens of thousands of other women who feel the same way. I'm not alone. And I see the love and the support and the positive messaging that comes in this space that it's not about being angry, it's not about being divisive, it's not about attacking anyone. Lots of people have differences of opinions, but we're just here to speak for anyone who aligns with our values and the sense of relief that there's a place where women can join up. And yeah, and I also think just just a really a positive sense of relief and joy and enthusiasm for just being able to say, we like trans people. Like people just want to say, we like trans people. Like, can we just say that, please? We like trans people. We want to hang out with them.
Absolutely, yeah.
Not that we're biased or anything, but yes, I share that sentiment. Yeah, I think from our perspective, and obviously my situation is slightly different, but it is that thing of seeing somebody be so joyful in themselves when they are themselves. It's like it's quite hard to explain to other people, isn't it? But when you know it and you see it, it's nice that other people can come back and just go, we like trans people, whatever their reason for doing that, and be comfortable with it. So
we put a nice post on our Facebook the other day, people can go and find, which is just 1 minute of trans people laughing. It's just trans people sitting on a sofa, and a lot of them with a cisgender loved one. And it's obviously the middle of the conversation, and it's just clips of them just getting the giggles. But it's like, yeah, like this is basically like our vision of the world. Like just having a nice time with and people being themselves and feeling free and happy.
Yeah, absolutely. There's an integrity in that that I love. So you've actually reached now over 100,000 signatures, which is an incredible achievement. So congratulations and well done on that. Can you tell me why that number was a key milestone and what's going to happen now that you've exceeded it? What happens next?
So, like I say, it was a volume number. It sounds like a big number. I remember at the first couple of meetings, it's like, oh, that's a big number. But it's also potentially links in with the thing that triggers a petition. You know, when people do those online petitions and things, it's the 100K that triggers something happening. And it feels like a big number. So I think it was an element of that, and enough that we could then go to MPs in a open and calm way to speak to them and say, look at all these people who are in your constituency who feel this way. So it needed to be enough people. And the more people, what we found since hitting the 100, and the little story about the 100, which is just couldn't have been more poetic if we'd tried. We actually hit it on the day of the anniversary of the Supreme Court ruling. I'm going to get all emotional about it because I remember sitting at my kitchen table going, I've really got work to do, but I'm just here refreshing the page, and everybody was in the chat because it was like we could not have planned that if we tried. It was just so poetic. But then it felt like that ball was rolling, because then suddenly we seemed to have just be getting more people, because now it feels like, oh, that's a really solid thing. That feels like it's like the gift of going second. People don't want to be the people that start early on. They were all the people that were very comfortable with it. You know, now it can be more of a mainstream thing because there's quite a lot of people there. So that's been really interesting to watch, hasn't it, over the last week or so, how it seems to just be gathering that momentum that we wanted. So yeah, so to go to those people that are in positions to influence things and get out beyond those MPs that we know are already supportive, to try to get them to feel confident to speak up, and carrying on spreading that in-person conversations and obviously things like this, and trying to get some media. We did actually get some really good media coverage, didn't we, the other day, which is like pretty much been the first time, but it did actually get across 2 or 3 different outlets, didn't it? So that was really exciting. And just keep that engagement going and trying to get out into a wider community. Because initially the people signing were in our networks. We got a lot just by everybody who was involved asking everybody. And you know, the Good Love Project have supported us, so some of the work they've done has really helped, and a lot of it's been through social media. But ideally it'd be great to get out into really getting out into communities, so that people who maybe aren't on social media and maybe still haven't got that awareness of what's going on. So I think it was just a good big number, and now we've got another even bigger number in mind. But yeah, we'll keep that to ourselves until we get a bit closer.
Well, I think it's amazing that you reached that number and now you're exceeding it. And as you say, you can feel the momentum growing, and it's important to have that real strong representation, isn't it? And that is what grabs attention, isn't it, really? And we need some attention on this. So I think it's a wonderful thing that you've done. I'm just wondering about, because I know you've mentioned the Supreme Court ruling. Can either of you or both of you just maybe share, for people that don't know, what some of the experiences, some of the issues that trans people generally experience that some of us might not know about?
So one of the things that we haven't really mentioned is off the back of that Supreme Court ruling, this other stuff happened, which was probably like waiting in the background anyway. But the Human Rights Commission, which is a government body, issued this updated code of practice supposedly to implement what the Supreme Court ruling had said, but it's been a big overreach in terms of what they actually said in the ruling. And essentially it's been about trying to exclude trans people, specifically a lot of it aimed at trans women, from public spaces. So the whole toilet debate, bathroom, public bathroom debate, and various other things. And so I can't speak to how it was for people before, because I don't really know, other than from anecdotal stuff from talking to friends, many older trans friends that I now have. But people not being able to go in public spaces where they would want to go, or if they had been quite happily using these spaces and nobody had been bothering them, to suddenly now feel like that all eyes were on them. And actually what's happened as a result of this hitting the public consciousness is there's been various people challenging cis women who don't conform to standard what a woman should look like criteria, and going, should you be in here, and things like that. And there's lots of stories of that, and we know people who that's happened to. So yeah, so just that feeling of not being able to just participate in public life. There's issues in the workplace of people, again, I have a friend this has happened to, of being stopped from using facilities that they were using before as a result of it, and then creating it really difficult for them to then be at work. There's other extensions of it around, I don't know, hospitals and changing rooms, and it just kind of goes on and on and on. So a lot of it is about not just being able to go about your day and go out, because if you feel like you can't go out and be in places and use facilities, it makes it very difficult to go out. And unfortunately, I'm sure we both know far too many people who, as a result of which, I don't go out very much. I feel incredibly fortunate that my daughter, who is, she's pretty gutsy, and she's getting on with her life, and she goes out and is confident about what she does, and that's been amazing to see. And for me, whenever I go anywhere out in public since this came out, every time I use a public bathroom, I think about it. Every single time, about how I just watch people and I'm thinking, nobody cares. Everybody's just going in, using the bathroom, washing their hands, going out. And I think about it all the time, just as a way of check and balancing. Is like, is anyone really paying that much attention to anybody else? No, they're not. So yeah, so it's really simple things that most of us, and again, this is about privilege, isn't it? And about not thinking about things when it doesn't affect you. So access for disabled people getting about and being able to use facilities is really difficult. You have no comprehension of that. The only inkling I've ever had of that is when my children were little and I had a pram, and then you realise what a nightmare it is getting anywhere when you've got something that doesn't go up and down steps very well, and you think, oh wow. But you don't know that until it affects you. But most of us just go about our day not aware of any restrictions for any other people. And so some of it's really quite simple, but pretty fundamental to just living. And that's without any like hate and abuse in the streets and the other things that people have had. And I know that is a thing as well, that maybe always existed. But I think with so many things that are going on at the moment, because of the way global politics is running, people feel like they have permission to be more unkind and to say things more than they ever did in certain spaces. And yeah, maybe it's more online, that is, and maybe it doesn't happen so much out in public, I don't know. But I do think that there's just a bit more freedom. People feel they have an ability to be really unkind.
Yeah, I think, like Jacqui says, I think there's been big ramifications just in the practicalities on the ground, and that is still all quite up in the air. So the code of practice that Jacqui mentioned, which is translating law into guidance on the ground, is currently sort of going back and forwards between the Minister for Equalities, Bridget Phillipson, and the EHRC, and there's ongoing legal cases trying to figure out what does this mean? How do we actually make this work on the ground? And I think what's really important for people to be aware of is that regardless of what exactly the Supreme Court ruling will mean in practice, prior to that ruling, the Code of Practice said that when we talk about single-sex spaces, trans people should basically be included according to the gender in which they present, unless there's a narrow exception that applies. And that's how the entire UK has been operating for decades. And that means that millions of people in thousands of UK services have been sharing spaces with trans people for years and years and years and years. When you go to the restaurant or the cinema or the swimming pool or whatever, trans women have been in the women's and trans men have been in the men's. And you probably never even realized, because trans people are not there to cause a fuss or to stick out, quite the opposite. And the Supreme Court really marks a kind of culmination of probably about 7 or 8 years of pressure against trans rights generally. And we've seen rollbacks in trans rights are really across the board. So we've seen it in the specific issue of use of single-sex services, but we're also seeing it more generally in the legal recognition and the social recognition of people's authentic identities. The fact that misgendering of trans people is happening in people, the BBC will just misgender trans people when they write articles about them. And that just seems to be fine now. Whereas in the Code of Practice, it says that that is potentially a form of harassment of trans people. And suddenly it's just fine. We're seeing huge rollbacks of trans healthcare. And I think a way of seeing this is that in around 2016, the UK was #1 on the Europe Rainbow Map for LGBT rights. And we've slipped down to 22nd, which is it's sort of on a par with like Hungary and Belarus. And that's primarily because of the UK position on trans rights. And to bring it back to kind of the practicalities, my wife struggles with her mental health. And actually, the other day I was saying, maybe we should go to the doctor. And she said, I don't want to go and talk to the doctor about my mental health because they might just decide to stop my HRT because they decide that's the problem. So my wife is just avoiding seeking healthcare because she feels that her current healthcare arrangements are so precarious. And in the month following the Supreme Court ruling, we had tickets to go and see one of our favourite comedians in Nottingham. And we booked it months ago, and we went, and mostly what we thought about was, what the hell toilet is she going to use in the interval? And what actually happened was she tried to use what was marked as the any gender toilet, which was next to a women's toilet. She walked in, it was completely full of men. So she just walked straight out again because it was mortifying for everybody. We went in the women's together. There was nobody else in there. She went for a wee and we came back again. But technically, she wasn't supposed to do that. But if she had gone into it was just bonkers and it ruined the night and it was silly. The whole thing was just silly. So yeah, I think people need to understand that trans rights were in a better position under the Conservative government under Theresa May than they are now. And where trans rights are in the UK now is probably around about where they are in the US. So if you look at the US and think what's happening to trans people in the US under Trump looks terrible, you just need to understand that it's pretty much the same as what's happening here. In fact, there are some things here that are actually worse. That's really where we're at.
Thank you so much. And you really touched me with that real life, genuine experience that both you and your wife are going through. And I'm so sorry that you are going through that. And I think it's just so important that we show our support any way we can and do what we can to change this, to allow people, going back to what David Tennant said, to just let people be. And I agree with what Jacqui said and what you said about when you go to the toilet, you just go in the toilet, and so are trans people. There's nothing else happening. There's no evidence of anything else happening. That is what people go to the toilet for. And it should be an everyday thing that people don't have to think about, shouldn't it, really? So I'm sorry that it isn't, but hopefully this letter will do some good towards that. It feels like a positive thing and that it will certainly help. I was wondering, what other initiatives have you got alongside the letter?
We've got some ideas going forward for how we want to take things forward out into the real world and into communities, and to create spaces, really inclusive spaces for people to get together and talk about other stuff, just to get together and actually see each other as human beings. But that's sort of in the pipeline for where we're kind of trying to take some of the work that we're doing afterwards. But I know there's been some really successful online campaigns that have got really nice engagement with people, haven't they, for people involving themselves and doing nice things and saying nice things.
Yeah, I think that we're very mindful that we're not necessarily a collective that is at the forefront of the sort of campaigning work for trans rights. There are some incredibly effective, great trans-led organizations that do a huge amount of that work and do it extremely well. So organizations like Trans Solidarity Alliance, Transactual, Translucent, Transparent Action. So there's lots of great organizations that are doing that. We in many ways see that we are, with our open letter, providing evidence that those organizations can turn to and use to support when they are campaigning for trans inclusion and speaking up for trans rights. When they say lots of cisgender non-trans people want this, they can point to our letter to show that the evidence is there for that. And so I think a lot of what we do is about that more soft and organic approach of engaging with our networks, engaging with different communities of women to build confidence, to have conversations, not just around trans rights, but also around, like we were saying, the real issues that we want to be addressing as women, and being able to, again, bring people back together, bring feminists and women back together so we can organize to be actually addressing those issues rather than get distracted by culture wars. So I think we are in a sort of little bit of a transition phase, excuse the pun, transition phase at the moment. Now that we've reached this milestone, I think we will be being able to build on that to expand our work a little bit. And yeah, so I think we've got lots of things in the pipeline. And I think it's worth saying that sometimes it looks like we're not doing lots of big flashy campaigns, but we always have a lot of things going on little by little in the background in our engagement with stakeholders, with different groups. So it's that slow, steady build of changing hearts and minds and having conversations and embedding these perspectives and these narratives and shifting the focus onto the work that really needs to be done to stand up for women and protect women and like we say, uplift the rights of everybody standing in solidarity together.
Yeah, I think it's beautiful what you're doing. It's so good building this kinder and fairer and inclusive world for all, which is surely what most of us want. I was just wondering, how do women get involved? How can they get involved with the collective if this is something that they've listened to and they think, oh, I want to do some stuff to help that? How can they get involved?
So, I mean, the first thing obviously is sign the letter if they're a cis woman, and share it with as many people as they can in whatever way feels appropriate. We've got some resources, haven't we, as well, that people can download off.
Oh, yes. Like, for example, if you want to get a t-shirt printed. But we've also got things like little posters you could put up if there's somewhere locally that you think women who share our values would go, or little flyers that you can have if you're going to an event that you might want to hand out some little bit of information, things like that. So you can help us spreading the word.
Yeah. If you sign up, there's an option to have you put your email in there, but that's because then you will then get the update. So some people just want to sign and that's it. If you do, then you'll be able to see what it is we are doing when we've got specific things that we need people to do. Obviously, follow us on any socials that you're involved in and just generally sharing and amplifying that message. And then we're going forward. I mean, you went to a couple of marches, haven't you? Well, this recently, Philippa, the Big Together Alliance one, we've got things going up. So there's ways if people want to do things, if that's your thing and you like going to a march and you were going to go anyway, you could get involved and get t-shirts and march with us. Because a lot of us are in other things. So a lot of us have got multiple hats on and we're in other groups as well. So it depends how much people want to do. So if all they want to do is sign and share, if they think that they might want to do more, then put the email down so they find out what else is going on. And then when we have other specific things, they'll get visibility of that. And certainly if they follow us as well, they'll see all of that. But yeah, going forward, there's more things we're wanting to do that might involve us wanting to find people in our local communities to be involved with things. And that's just where we're going now. But the way to do that is just to be following us and paying attention to what we're doing, and put your hand up if and when that feels like something that suits you. We didn't want to be like bombarding people. I guess the other thing is write to your MP is the other thing that people can do, and say that you support and that you've signed the letter and things like that. That would be another really useful way in which people get involved at the moment.
Yeah, so I think like Jacqui says, people can do as much or as little as they want. So I think we almost see it as different sort of levels of what people may feel they have time for or what they feel confident doing. So like we're saying, kind of at the bottom of the ladder, there's just sign the letter. Just sign the letter, forget about it, move on, get on with the rest of your life. But your signature counts and it all adds up and it's helpful. Next step is share the letter, maybe ping it to a few people that you think might be supportive. Probably the step up from that is maybe just have a few gentle conversations about it. Again, we very much talk about meeting people where they're at. It's not about telling people that they're right or wrong. It's just about maybe just sharing that, just dropping the fact that you support trans people into the conversation. And it doesn't have to be a big debate. It can just be, oh yeah, I signed a letter about trans inclusion. I did that the other day or whatever. So just gently having these kind of in-person, on the ground conversations. And if it's getting heated, back off because we do not want to polarize people. And we are hoping to put together a few resources to give some people some sort of toolkits and some little bits of guidance about how to have conversations in their networks. Like Jacqui said, we do sometimes put shout outs in our newsletter or on our social media if we're, for example, going to a specific in-person event, and we sometimes invite people who might want to come along and join us to represent Neon. We did that at the Together Alliance March, and we had some of our lovely followers who came and just marched with us, and it was a great way to meet them in person and get to know them. So we put some shout outs, or we have little campaigns going like the Letters of Love to the trans community that we did for Valentine's Day. So again, that's a level that you can get involved in. And we're also just at the moment working on getting some structures in place so that we might be able to bring some more people on as volunteers in our actual core collective. So we are wanting to find more ways for people to get involved, and we're working on it. And yes, we will be sharing more about that as we go forward. So keep an eye on our socials and sign up for our newsletter.
Yeah. And I want to encourage everybody to go and sign the letter. If you're watching this, it takes 2 minutes of your time just to read through, put your name on. And if you want to be kept up to date, like Jacqui said, you can just put your email in and receive some updates. And I will put all the information for that in the show notes so that people can just very easily get to that. We're coming to an end now, so I'm just wondering if there's anything else that either of you want to say before we come to a close.
Well, mainly just to say thank you for inviting us to come on and for amplifying it and sharing it with your community. You're doing an amazing thing by doing this and talking about the subjects that you're talking about and sharing it with people. And there's this ripple effect, like Philippa said, about having conversations, however small or however many people or whoever you reach. There are ripple effects of things when we say things to people, aren't they? And it makes people think, and it might challenge them, but it might also make them say something different the next time it comes up in a different conversation. So it's just so powerful, and we have to have that hope that is of value, particularly at the moment, don't we? We have to find those ways of feeling like even the smallest thing actually does make a difference.
Yeah, sowing seeds, isn't it?
Yeah. And yeah, just a thank you to everyone who's listening as well, that's just taken the time to tune in, and yeah, come along and join us. We're a nice bunch. And thank you so much to Luna for again just giving this space, just giving us an opportunity to share what we have to say and reach out to those women out there that again maybe feel similarly, want to know where they can come and join in and be part of a community that it's very much those values of inclusion and solidarity rather than division and exclusion, and speaking up for everyone, really bringing everyone together.
Thank you both for your time, and thank you for what you're doing. I really love what you're doing. I think it's great, and I think it's gathering momentum, and I'm excited to see where it goes, and I'm happy to be a support in this small way.
Thank you.
Just before we end, I ask every guest, what would their vision of an ideal world look like? So could you both just tell me?
Yeah, so it's a lovely question. It's a lovely question, and it gives some thought to it. I think it's about people being kinder and more open and curious about the world and about the people in it, and to expect and to see the best in others. I just think we're not very good at that.
Yeah, I think that's lovely.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's such a big question, but I think it's the same. I think I would want a world where people are free to be themselves and people aren't scared of difference. And absolutely, Jackie, that people come at things from a position of curiosity and I don't know, I'm just picturing kittens and rainbows to be quite honest. But I think it's a world where there's joy actually. And joy, I think joy comes from when I connect with someone or I experience kindness with someone, it just feels great. It just feels so nice. And I sort of think emotions like anger and rage and grievance and spite and othering of people can feel very powerful and empowering and galvanizing in a lot of ways. But ultimately, it's so corrosive. And I just think it feels really nice to be nice. And I just think showing kindness to others can just feel really good to have that sense of that we can connect and feel warm together, just feel good together. And that's what I want. Yeah. Hug a cat. Just if we can just hug all the people and the cats.
Yeah, I can definitely get behind that. That matches my vision, what you've both said. And it's like Jackie was saying, it's the ripple effect, isn't it, of the kindness and being open and curious and unassuming. And together we'll all get there, won't we? And just let people be. So thank you
Mm.
both for coming on. Thank you
Yeah.
to the audience for watching. And please do go and sign the letter and get involved. It's so important. It's very quick to do and it sends a strong message. So please do take the time to do that. So thank you both for joining me now.